Hello there, welcome to another lesson on C++. Today we'll be taking a look at arrays in C++. Alright, so let's dive into our slides and see what we have on arrays. Alright, so what are arrays in C++? Let's go. Our first point says an array acts as a container that allows you to store and work with multiple values of the same data type. Alright, so instead of creating one variable that is going to store one item, array can help you store a lot of or multiple items of the same data type. And the best thing about array is that they are saved in memory in a particular pattern. Alright, so we have a visual representation of an array down here, this picture right here. Yeah, and this picture is, let's say, an array of size 5. That means it can contain 5 items for this particular array. Yeah, and I can also say that when it comes to arrays, we have something we call the index of an array. So the index are like a subscript, right? The position, the actual position of an item in the array's memory. All right. So when we talk of index, the index of the very first item of an array is always 0, and then it's followed by 1, 2, and then it goes all the way. So you keep in mind that the index of an array always starts at 0. All right. So let's go to our second point. We also have arrays store multiple elements of the same data type sequentially in side-by-side memory location, just as the image shows us. All right, so you can create an array, and then usually as a beginner what you would want to do is to be putting your inputs from the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever way A follows, right? But then you can also create an array, specify the size, and then choose to place items in them separately, like not for them to follow this particular order, as in the first one has to be here, the second has to be here. Once the size has been specified, the size of the array has been specified, you can put an item here, 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 and then later come to put in for position 1, position 3, and all that. Right. Okay, so let's go to our third point. The size of a raw C++ array must be known at compile time and cannot grow or shrink dynamically. Yeah, so this point is telling us that usually when you declare an array, you want to give it a size. All right, you want the compiler to know the size of the array so that it can give it a fixed memory size in memory. All right, but then you would like to do something that while your program is running, you would want to change the size of the array depending on whatever values or intake you'll be making. All right, so that is not possible with arrays. All right, so usually you want to make your size known to the compiler before you can compile your program. All right, so the next thing we will have is how we can declare an array and then initialize an array. All right, so we have basic declaration. So the basic declaration on how you can declare an array is to give it the data type. The data type comes first, then the array name, then the dimension or the size of an array. Right, so there can be multiple dimensions to an array, right? But then for us to understand the very basics concept of an array, we start with the one dimension. All right, just as this image is depicting to us, it's just one memory space in a continuous line, right? There can also be a two-dimensional array where you can have a visual representation of a matrix, right? You can have that too. as well as three-dimensional arrays and the likes. All right. So here we get to know that we need the data type of the array name, a square braces that is going to contain the size of the array. So we have an example that follows. We have int scores and then the size of the array being 5. All right, this creates space for 5 integers containing uninitialized garbage values. All right, usually when you create an array, you can choose not to initialize them with the values. All right, and so when you create an array of this sort, int scores then 5, this is going to take up some memory space. All right, and usually since you don't specify anything that was left in the memory, all right, what we usually term as garbage values, that is what will be placed inside those memory spaces until you populate them with whatever values you want to give the array. Yeah, then we also have direct initialization. So with direct initialization, what we have here is creating an array of type int. The data type is int. Then the array name is numbers with a size of 3. And then we are initializing them with the values 10, 20, 30. These are three numbers going into the array where we specify the type is 3. Then you also have to take note of the curly braces here. This is when you are populating your array with some sort of items. All right. We also have zero initialization. Int matrix with a size of 100 equals 0. This sets every element in the array to 0 safely. So just as we spoke about the garbage values in the first example, if you want to get rid of that garbage values, but then you are also not ready to populate your array, you can just assign the array to 0 or even bring the curly braces without any value, and that is going to make the element in the array 0. All right, then we have the deduction. So this is basically creating an array, but then you are not specifying the size. So if you don't specify the size, you have to initialize the values you want to give the array. And in this case, the compiler will automatically determine the size of the array depending on the number of elements you have assigned to the array. So this allows the compiler to auto calculate the size, and in this case it's going to be 3. Then we can also have partial array initialization. So we have int number 7. We've declared an array of size 7. All right, that means our array should contain 7 items, but then we assign 4 elements to our array. Yeah, so moving on with your program, you can go ahead and then populate it with the rest of the values, but then you can't go beyond the specified size of the array. That is going to give you out of bounds error. All right, so let's go into our IDE and then have some practical example on arrays. All right, so first thing we are going to look at is the structure, which we already know to be the data type of the array. The array's name, you need a square braces, then the size of the array or the dimension. All right, so this is the basic structure of an array. So let's create an array that is going to take the age of 5 people, right? So we come down here, what do? Age is practically going to have a data type of int, right? So let's use int as our data type. Then we can have the variable, we can have the array name as age. Then we need the square braces. We are taking it for 5 people. So our array size is going to be 5. Then we can end this here and then later on populate the array. All right, so let's go ahead and see how we can populate the array. In order for us to do that, mostly it will be better for you to use a loop. You run through the loop, and for each of the indexes you can assign a value to it. But then let's take it one at a step, and then from here we can move on to using a loop to take the values we want to assign to our array. So let's go age, and then the first item is going to have an index of 0. So you keep that in mind, and this we can assign a value of any number we want to give. All right, so let's say 54. The second item in our array is going to have an index of 1. We can again put an age there. We can have another and then put something there. All right, so practically this is going to be the sizing or the index to our array. Remember, we are taking in 5 elements, and then the array index starts from 0. So we end at 4, and at the end of the day, if you count the number of items we have here, it should be 5, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we can also say that the index of the last item of an array is going to be, so let's say we have age as a variable, and then our size is n. The index of the last item is always going to be the size of the array minus 1. All right, so in this case we had 5 as the size of our array, and the last item in our array is having an index of 4, which is our array size minus 1, right? So I hope you are not confused by the concept of indexing. All right, so now we've been able to assign values to our array. Let's go ahead and then print out some of the values from our arrays. So we can go ahead and say see out. Let's say we want to see the value inside the very first item, which is having an index of 0. We can do age, the array name, then the index, then we can end it here. So this is basically going to give us the value inside the first item of the array. So let's run this, and we expect to have 54 as our answer because we assigned 54 to the very first index of the array. All right, so same way you can go ahead and do this one at a time for each of the values we have. So let's say 1, 2, 3, and 4, and this is basically going to print out all the items in our array, right? So we have 54, 23, 32, 21, and then 9, and these are the values we have in our array. So let's try something with it. Let's try accessing a value out of the array's memory size. and see what is going to happen. All right, so we have these things here, and we also have 0 here. So remember I spoke about um garbage values, right? Garbage values, they are also influenced by the scope of the array, where you declare the array. All right, so if it's a global variable, usually they are going to have um these garbage variables, and even creating it inside a function also has an implication with the garbage variable. All right, so from here we can go ahead and start applying loops to our code. And loops are basically going to help us move through our loop better instead of writing each line of code for the items in our array. So let's go ahead and delete this. We can also take this away. And yeah, we have an array of size 5. Right, so instead of doing what we did before, you can also have this right here and put in the values of um your array in there. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this will also work. All right, so let's just print out the value of the third item in the array. So we can do age, and remember, whenever you are calling or assigning a value to the array, you use the index. All right, so what will be the index of the third item? This is going to have an index of 0. Let's put down a comment here. This is going to have, the 21 is going to have an index of 0. 43 is going to have an index of 1. 23 is going to have an index of 2. 54 is going to have an index of 3. And then 34 is going to have an index of 4. All right, so we want to access the value inside the third element. All right, so we go ahead and do the index, which is basically 2. And let's run this and see. All right, so let's end this one with a semicolon and run this again. Then there you have it, 23, and 23 is the value inside the third element of the array. All right, so how can we use a loop to fill or populate the values of an array? All right, so let's take away these ones here. This is all right, so let's just create another array, let's say numbers, and define the size to be 4. So this is an array that is going to take in 4 numbers, right? So how can we populate this? Let's say we've declared an array. Later we want to ask a user to enter an input, enter a number, and then those numbers are going to be saved inside the arrays. All right, so we are going to use the for loop here because we know the size of the array. Right, and we don't want to go beyond the boundaries of the array. We know where we have to end. So let's declare an initial value 0. Why 0? Because arrays start with index of 0, right? So you want to make sure if you are using a loop, you are always starting from 0. That is in relation with arrays, right? So we want to start from 0 and we want to end at 4, right? So this array is going to start from 0. It goes to 1, 2, and 3. This is giving us 4 iterations. And remember, the index for this array is going to start from 0. It goes to 1, it goes to 2, it goes to 3. For the 4 items we are going to take, right? And let's move on. I plus plus. This is going to increase our step by 1 each time the loop runs. All right, so let's say we want to take some input from the user. So let's just print out a message to our user and tell them to enter a number. Basically, it has to be an integer. Okay, so in here we can do see out ask the user to enter for number I plus 1. All right, so first iteration, this is going to be 0. So 0 plus 1 is going to give us 1. So we are basically telling the user to enter the number for 1, or maybe the first value, right? Then let's end this with a colon, and we can come down here, do saying the array, right? So it's numbers, then the index, so I. All right, so this is basically going to allow the user to enter the values and store them for each of the array indexes, right? So when we do the first iteration, I is going to be 0, and when the user is making their entry, it's going to be numbers 0. That is going to be saved inside the first item for the array. For the second iteration, I is going to be 1, and when you get here, it's going to be numbers 1, which will be the second item in the array. So whatever the user is going to enter is going to be saved inside here. And then third iteration, I is going to be 2. We come here, numbers I, where I is 2. So that will go to the third position. Whatever they are going to enter is going to go to the third position of the array. Then lastly, we can go to 3. So numbers 3, what they will enter is going to the fourth position, which is having an index of 3. All right, so this is basically going to allow the user to enter the values and then save them in the respective positions of the arrays. All right, so let's go ahead, run this and see if we don't have any errors, and we can work with this. All right, so enter a number. We have enter for number 1, right? So we can do 21, enter for number 2, enter for number 3, number 4. All right, and then the program ends. All right, so let's go ahead and write a code that can help us print out these values. You can go ahead and pause the video, try it yourself, and then continue with the video and then see how that could be done. So basically, just as we use the for loop to take in the values, we can also use a loop to print out the values. Usually when you are working with arrays, you want to use loops to make your things work faster, right? All right, so let's create another loop. Declare another variable. So let's do I equals 0. Basically, they are going to have the same structure, and I plus plus. So let's go ahead and then print out the values saved inside this array to the screen. So we can simply do cout the array's name, which is numbers in this case. So numbers, and then square braces, then I. Yeah, this can basically do what we need, right? Let's go ahead and print out some message here. Below are the values stored in the array. All right, so let's go ahead, run this, enter some values, and see if we are going to get those exact values. So enter a number. We can do 4, 3, 2, and 1. Then we get below are the values stored in the array, which is 4, 3, 2, and 1. Yeah, so this is very easy and fun to work with. Arrays and then loops. Basically, the for loops, right? You can also try using the other loops to work around this. Okay, so what can we do again? So there is actually this thing we have to go ahead and look at. We have the range based for loop, and the range based for loop is a loop that iterates once for each element in an array. Each time the loop iterates, it copies an element from the array to a variable. This range based for loop actually makes printing um, the elements of an array very simple. Alright, so this is basically the structure for the range based for loop. And with a range based for loop, you have your for data type and a variable that is basically going to be for the range. Then we have the array name. You separate them with a column. So with the array name, you don't need any square braces to define the array, and then you can have your statement or code below the coding section of the loop, right? So remember, if you are having more than one line of code, you have to bring the square braces, no, the curly braces, right? So we have an example here. We can go ahead and try out. So let's go back to the compiler. Remember, in here we use a normal for loop to print out our values. All right, so let's actually try using the range based for loop to print out the values. And with that, what do we need? We use the for loop, give the data type, say int, and you can do val, a variable name for printing out getting the indexes and printing out the value, right? Then you separate it with a colon. Then we can have the array name, say numbers. Then we can simply output val here, val, and say end line. Yeah, so this is basically how the range based for loop also works. Very simple. You can practice around this. So let's run this and we expect to have the same output. So let's go ahead. This time let's do 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we have below are the values stored in the array. So 6, 7, 8, and 9. This is basically the concept for a range based for loop. Alright, so they look very similar. You can work with this and you can also work with this. So remember, here we only use the name of the array. We didn't specify any square braces here, right? Yeah, so each time the iteration runs, it basically uses the size of the array. It knows this is actually an array. So val or whatever variable you are going to give here is actually going to start with the index of 0 and then run to the end of the array. All right, so it gets to work with the actual size of the array and doesn't go beyond the size of the array. All right, so this can basically help you prevent accessing out of bounds memory for the array. Right, so you can consider making use of that too instead of a normal for loop. Right, so what can we actually do again with this? This is basically the concept. And let's see if there is something I have to talk about again. Int age, you do not specify the size. Yeah, we can do that. So here we have age, we specify the size, and we also give the items for the array. You can also do this, leave out the size, and the compiler is automatically going to know the size of the array depending on this, right? So let's come down here and then print out, um let's have a 4 and int say val and then say age, and then let's just print out val. Yeah, so this is basically going to print out these values here without giving us any errors, right? Yeah, so we have the value stored in age being 21, 43, and all the way to 34. Then the program continues. Yeah, but then you cannot have an array, let's say, int names, and then you do not specify a size and then leave it just like that and then try to work with that. That is going to give you an error. So let's just try and then print out, um let's say, name and then the index at 3. Yeah, so this is giving us an error that we do not know the size of the array. So the compiler is going to give you an error storage size of name isn't known. All right, so that is why we went through these things. You can go ahead and then review what we talked about in this stage. So if you are leaving out the size, just make sure you are assigning values to them, and the compiler is going to know the required size for the array. All right, so welcome to this section 2, where we are just going to have a look at two-dimensional arrays and then do some practicals alongside, and then we can complete this lesson. So just like the one-dimensional array we just spoke about, this two-dimensional arrays is just combining rows and columns to depict some sort of a matrix, right? Okay, so what do we have here? We have a two-dimensional arrays is like several identical arrays put together, like the single ones. So you can see all the arrays we created. You can say this is for age, this is for numbers, and this is for rows, and then we are combining everything together. All right, but then you have to know that two-dimensional arrays, even though we are saying several identical arrays, they have to be of the same data type, right? So they are of the same data type and everything works together. It is useful for storing multiple sets of data. All right, so how do you declare a two-dimensional array? We have a data type. We need a data type, the array name, then we need two square braces, which the first one is going to be the size or the dimension for the row, and then the second will be the dimension or the size for the column, right? Then we have an example here saying double scores as 3 and 4. The 3 goes for the rows, the number of rows. So in this example, we have row 1, row 2, row 3 with index of 0, 1, and 2. And then the columns, there are 4 sides or 4 columns, which are going to have index of 0, 1, 2, 3. All right, so the data we have here are actually telling us the index of each of the array, right? So this is a two-dimensional array. The first index is going to be 0 for the row, then 0 for the column, right? So for the first row, the index is 0. Every item on the first row is going to have the first index being 0. All right, then we go to the second row. Every item will have the first index being 1, depicting it to the second item or the second row, right? Then this is going to have 2 for their rows. So the same thing happens for the columns too. Column 1 is having an index of 0, so everything gets an index of 0 for the columns. The second column has an index of 1, so everything will have, the columns are going to have an index of 1, right? So that's basically the whole concept of it. There are three-dimensional arrays too, which you can look around it later on, right? So this is basically the concept for the two-dimensional arrays. We've already looked at the basic arrays, which is the one-dimensional array, so we don't have to worry ourselves going through the the declaration for each of these. They are basically the same concept, right? So let's go ahead and try do something small here. All right, so we can try doing something just like the image we saw. So let's say a variable name as matrix, and let's do a size of 3 by 3, right? This is going to be the size of our array, and remember we can do this declaration and then later on populate the items for the array. But let's go ahead and assign some values to our array, and we can have this here. So let's have this. Let's see, on the first row with index 0 we can have 1, 2, 3. We can also have 4, 5, and 6. And we can end with um, 7, 8, and 9, right? So that will basically be the structure. So in order for us to understand it visually, that's why I have it here, but you can put everything on the same line. So let's do a comment here. You can have it like this. Say int matrix and 3, 3. So instead of separating them, you can actually do this for the first one. 1, 2, 3. You end this, you separate with a colon. 4, 5, 6. Then 7, 8, 9. Then you end with the actual block for the array. All right, so you can do it this way. All right, and you can also have it this way in order for us to get the visual representation of what we have. That is why I'm having it in this structure, right? All right, so now let's go ahead and use a loop to output the values of this array. So we can do for int, and let's say I is equal to 0, then I is going to be less than 3, then I plus plus. All right, so this right here is going to be for the row. We are going to use a nested loop. So the first loop, which is the outer loop, is going to stand for the row, and the inner loop, let's do int j equals 0, j is less than 3, then j plus plus is going to be for the column. All right, the inner loop is going to represent the column. So let's print out with some. We can basically do see out the array name is matrix, then the row is having I, then the column is having j, right? So first iteration, when this is 0, it's going to stand for the first row, which is having an index of 0, and then it's going to run through this loop 3 times, starting from 0 to 2. where the index are going to be 0 for this column, 1 for this column, then 2 for this column. So when the outer loop runs one time, this is going to run 3 times, right, before it comes to the third iteration, the second iteration, then the third iteration. So let's go ahead and you can separate these values with a comma. Yeah, then let's end this. So let's run this and see what we come out with. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right. So when the each row is printed, we can actually break this down to have a similar look of what we have above. So this is going to break the output after each iteration for this, and then you can push the next row to the next line. Yeah, so after the first iteration, the next row is pushed to the second row, and then the next row is also pushed to the third row, right? So that's basically the concept of the two-dimensional arrays. Anything we did for the one-dimensional arrays, you can implement it here, but I think for the range-based for loop, it works a bit different. So you can look into that and apply it whenever it's necessary. Alright, so this will be the end of this video. Make sure to like the video, hit on the subscribe button. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comment section, and do well to share the videos with your friends too.